Welcome to the Explainer. Now, when you think of the Mughal Empire, you probably picture grand palaces, epic battles, all that stuff. But today, we're going to forget all that for a minute. We're digging into the real foundation of the empire, the soil itself. We are exploring the massive agrarian world that powered one of history's greatest empires during the 16th and 17th centuries. Let's just start with this one number, because it frames everything. 85%. That's roughly how many people in Mughal India lived in villages. Just think about that. This wasn't an empire that just had a farming sector. It was an empire built almost entirely on agriculture. That 85% was the engine powering the whole show. So, how are we going to piece this all together? Well, we'll start with the big picture, this idea of an empire of villages. Then, we're going to zoom right in and get our hands dirty, looking at daily life in the fields. From there, we'll explore the village community itself and meet the local power brokers who really ran things. And finally, we'll see how the emperor kept tabs on it all with his incredible accounting books. Right, so, an empire of villages, and that is not an exaggeration. All those magnificent courts, the sprawling armies, the whole opulent state, it was all paid for by the surplus generated out in the countryside. The story of Mughal wealth doesn't start in the capital city. It starts in thousands and thousands of humble villages. Okay, so if the villages were the engine, who were the people actually doing the work? Let's dive into life in the fields. Who were these cultivators and what were they growing? What you find is a surprisingly complex and dynamic agricultural world, one that was, believe it or not, already going global. At the heart of it, you had the peasants, but not all peasants were the same. You basically had two main types. On one hand, you've got the Hud Kashta. Think of them as the locals, the insiders. They lived in the village and they farmed their own land. But then you have this other group, the Pahi Kashta. These guys were more like, well, agricultural freelancers. They traveled to other villages, work land on contract, maybe chasing better tax rates or fleeing a famine. It tells you there was actually a lot of movement and economic strategy going on at the ground level. And this is where things get really wild. The 17th century saw a total culinary revolution. I mean, look at this list. Maize from Africa, tobacco from the Americas, and things we think of as absolutely essential to Indian food today. Tomatoes, potatoes, chilies, they weren't even there before this period. This was the beginning of a complete transformation of the Indian diet, all thanks to these new global trade routes. But, while new foods were exciting for the dinner table, the Mughal state had its eyes on a very different prize. They were focused on what they called jinz-e-camel, which literally translates to perfect crops. And why were they perfect? Well, they weren't for eating. They were for selling. Crops like cotton and sugarcane brought in hard cash, and the state pushed farmers to grow them because, let's face it, you can't pay an army with pineapples. You need money. Now, all this farming and trading didn't just happen in a vacuum. A village was so much more than just a collection of fields. It was this complex, self-regulating community held together by a really intricate web of social rules, caste hierarchies, and economic ties. So let's try to untangle that web. Okay, and we have to be really clear about this. A fundamental reality of village life was deep structural inequality. Caste lines were incredibly rigid. Your caste didn't just influence your life. In many ways, it completely determined it. What job you could do, whether you could own land, and even where you were physically allowed to live. And this isn't just some abstract idea. The historical sources give us these powerful, very human examples. I mean, listen to this. Groups like the Halal Quran, who were scavengers, and the Malazadas were considered untouchable. This meant they were forced to live physically separate from everyone else, on the outskirts of the village. It was a constant, visible reminder of that rigid social order. So how did the village economy actually work day to day? It wasn't all about cash. A huge piece of the puzzle was something called the Jajmani system. This was basically a system of reciprocal exchange. The village artisans, the potter, the blacksmith, the barber, they didn't get paid in coin for their services. Instead, they got a fixed share of the harvest from the farming families. It was this complex system of obligations that really bound the whole community together. Okay, so you've got peasants, you've got artisans, you've got this complex web of social rules, but who was actually in charge? Who settled all the disputes and, more importantly, collected the taxes for the emperor? Well, let's meet the local power brokers who were really running the show on the ground. And this is the key question, right? Who was really calling the shots day to day? Was it the emperor way off in his grand capital? Or was it someone much, much closer to home? The answer, as you might have guessed, is A bit of both. So the first layer of local power was the panchayat. You can think of it like a village council, usually run by elders from the more dominant castes. And their job description was huge. They managed the village finances, they made sure the state got its tax money, they organized big community projects like digging wells, and crucially, they acted as the guardians of that social order, enforcing all those strict caste rules. But the panchayat, as important as it was, wasn't the top of the local food chain. Nope. Above them stood a single, powerful individual who often held authority over not just one village, but a whole region. And that figure was the Zamindar. The name literally means owner of the land, and these guys were the true rural elite. They weren't just simple landlords. They were this critical and often incredibly powerful middleman between the thousands of villages and the imperial state itself. So what made these zamindars so powerful? It wasn't just one thing. It was this potent cocktail of factors. First, they usually had high caste status. Second, they owned enormous amounts of land personally, their milkiyat. Then the state gave them the official job of collecting all the revenue. And, this is the real kicker, they often had their own private armies and forts. Yeah, a combination like that made them forces you really had to reckon with. So we have this complex, layered world of peasants, artisans, councils, and these powerful zamindars. The final question is, how did the emperor in his distant capital manage to control and, more importantly, tax all of it? Well, the answer lies in absolutely meticulous record-keeping. The state's approach was incredibly systematic. They didn't just tax land, they classified it. As you can see here, every single field was categorized based on how productive it was. Pelage was the prime real estate, farmed every single year, while Banjar was land that was rarely cultivated. Each category had a different tax rate, creating this really sophisticated system designed to extract the maximum possible revenue without totally crippling the farmers. And the ultimate expression of this obsession with order was a document called the Ain-e-Akbari. Think of it as the empire's ultimate spreadsheet, compiled during Emperor Akbar's reign. This table gives you a glimpse of how the state saw the world. To them, the empire wasn't a messy collection of people. It was this perfectly organized pyramid of administrative units, from the huge province or suba all the way down to the individual village. And it was all designed for one primary purpose: efficient tax collection. And this brings us to our final thought. The Ain-e-Akbari is incredible. It gives us this amazing top-down view of the empire as a giant accounting book. But it also makes you wonder, what about the stories that a tax record can never tell? What about the daily struggles, the creativity, and the incredible resilience of the millions of people whose labor was the true foundation of all that Mughal power? That's the part of the story that's so much harder to find in the official records.